Hey everyone, welcome to Free Assange Vigil Week 50. It blows my freaking mind that we've been doing this for 50 straight weeks. Before we get into the show and the news and our very special guest, my name is Steve Poikinen. I am joined by my co-host Andrew Smith, and let's run down some numbers for you. Today marks 3,478 days since the illegal and arbitrary detention of Julian Assange began. 432 days since he was trafficked out of the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 83 days until the second phase of the extraordinary rendition of Julian Assange begins in a British court. 1,109 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. And on the positive side, today marks 95 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning since the decade-long WikiLeaks grand jury was dismissed. You guys, we are trying to get back to Washington, D.C. for all 3 weeks of the rendition hearings. And we are crowdfunding for that. If we could get that GoFundMe put up on the screen, please, and we'll make sure that the links get dropped into the appropriate chats. Really want to thank the folks that have donated so far. We love you, and we cannot do this without you. And having done the business, guys, we're just stoked tonight to be joined by one of my personal favorite radio personalities. I had the privilege of being on Fault Lines Radio when we were in DC the last time, and that was so much fun. So without further delay, please welcome to the show tonight, Garland Nixon. How are you, sir?
Great. Thanks a lot for having me on.
We are very pleased to have you join us tonight. It's been since February, and you are in a position to where you kind of have your finger on the pulse of both how traditional and independent media feel. You're right there, as Lee Camp puts it, in the belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. Have you seen any progress, any movement towards people coming around to the realization that, and I'm speaking specifically about media personalities here, that their careers will be impacted if Julian Assange spends 175 years in prison for the charges of doing journalism?
Well, I see it in indie media and independent media, definitely. I do my show, of course, my Sputnik radio show, but I also have been doing a show since 2006, and I've actually had my own show since 2013 on Pacifica, which is WPFW in Washington, D.C. So I'm an indie media person. Done a lot of traditional media also, but my home and my heart is in indie media, and to be honest, that's where I see it, in independent media. And I think there's a reason for it. And it's unfortunate because I believe now, based on what I see in the mainstream media, that they look at it and they don't believe that they would be subjected to anything different than they are now. You think to yourself, well, gee, if Assange as a publisher goes down, then all of the New York Times, the Washington Post, they basically released a lot of the stuff that he released. So you would think that they'd have some concern, that they would feel that they'd have some, certainly legal jeopardy. The problem is they probably really don't, because they've turned into basically stenographers for power. So, I don't think they stop to think that if they ever decide to go against the international deep state or the powers that be, that they would find themselves in legal jeopardy, because they never actually planned to do that. And that's the sad state of affairs. I don't even believe what we call the legacy media or the mainstream media. I don't even consider it media anymore. I consider it public relations firms for power.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. It's a sad state of affairs. The thing that we usually point to is the Afghan files that the Washington Post released last year. that really did nothing but corroborate everything that WikiLeaks had been saying for over a decade at that point. The gentleman who put that together, he could potentially be thrown into prison, charged under the Espionage Act for that report. And there's got to be, I mean, hell, we've had how many 60 to 80 different journalists get shot at, arrested, tear gassed, well, just over the last 2 weeks. It's one of those things where, like, I realize that if you're a pundit and you're sitting in, a damn near $1 million studio or multi-million-dollar studio, you're not the cub reporter or the scrub that they send out into the streets to go get tear gassed. But you would think that on some level that would resonate with them, and it would kind of hit home a little bit that, like, oh boy, they're just going after everyone now.
Well, even in that, what we oftentimes seems like, to look at that, it appears as though, okay, maybe the Washington Post, maybe they're doing, an actual honest expose there. Maybe they are finally doing some journalism. But if you look at what happened then, the Washington Post, of course, is owned by the richest man in the world, which is Jeff Bezos. At that time, Jeff Bezos was angry. Just before that, Amazon was competing with Microsoft for a $10 billion contract with the Pentagon, right? Microsoft gets it over Amazon. Microsoft also makes some claims that Amazon was basically, to sum it up, bribing people, that basically they were in the Pentagon talking to people that awarded the contract and negotiating jobs for the person, for them to leave the Pentagon after Amazon got the contract and come to work for Amazon. Well, the bottom line was, and there's been an ongoing lawsuit going on there since. So Amazon gets angry at the Pentagon because they don't get the $10 billion contract. Voila, a week later, and remember, Amazon does nothing. I mean, they're just mouthpieces for the Pentagon. They don't get that $10 billion contract. Boom, a week later, all of these articles coming out exposing that the Pentagon was up to no good. I think that was what they call in baseball chin music, a brushback. They were brushing them back off the plate. Oh, we didn't get this $10 billion contract. Don't forget, anytime we want, we can make you look bad. So even that, I think that was a battle amongst the elite classes over contracts and things of that nature. So are they really in any legal jeopardy? No, they're playing. They're going to have their games, and both sides understand that the elite class have their wars. But I don't. It's a sad, as we keep saying, it's a sad state of affairs when what we call journalism, what we thought of journalism now, they're just so close, particularly to the security state, particularly to, the international security state, that I just don't think, not only do they not feel like they'd be in any jeopardy, I'll put it like this. To talk about the media, and the national security state is to talk about my fingers and my hand and my body. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My finger, I'm not going to hurt my hand or my fingers or my body. I use those things. They're very valuable to me. And that's what they are. They're valuable to them, valuable outlets. And they may have their little skirmishes, but that's as far as it's going to go.
Yeah. And I think that's a super brilliant point too. Because you even see it down to the level of how they game the system and who benefits and how distractions are built and how people are divided. And one of the biggest examples of this is something that we're seeing kind of rolling out across the world right now, where people are too divided to actually come together on conversations about the coronavirus or about the riots or the lockdowns, while at the same time the national security state is just needlessly expanding and people are just fed on social media hype that makes them feel a certain way. So that model of the body's not going to hurt its own hand, I think, is one of the most accurate representations of what we're facing with mainstream media and the military state right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, being in DC, you see it. And, because I cover, a lot of stuff in England and here, and I don't know if you followed there was an organization called the Integrity Initiative. And what you're starting to see, the other thing we're starting to see is this. and that is that the international security state, this is not, as we saw with what's going on with Assange, right? The United States pretty much funds in England the equivalent of our national security agency, right? We pretty much fund it, which means we pretty much own it, which means it's not MI6, it's part of the CIA, it's part of the NSA. If we cut the money out, it goes away. So we have we've got one security agency that all works together, and they've all, worked together. They're working together to take Julian Assange out. And the guy, here's the bottom line. The man is a tremendous threat, because in empire, the biggest threat is the truth. They can deal with a lot. They can deal with a lot of attacks. What they can't deal with is exposing the truth, because there's power and their strength is in their anonymity. That's where it is, that we don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they're doing it. And what happens, here's the thing, this interesting thing I think about what's happened with Julian Assange. Oftentimes, I would find that WikiLeaks would not expose something that shocked us. We didn't look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't believe that." Here's what generally happened. As an example, would be the DNC releases, right? Everybody would look and say, we know something's crooked here. It's obvious something's rotten in Denmark, but we wouldn't have the evidence, but we would know it. And then WikiLeaks would get something and they would release it and we would have the evidence. So as long as the people out here who opposed empire, who opposed war, who opposed the international security state, as long as we could just accuse them of what everybody knew they were doing, they'd call us conspiracy theorists. They'd laugh us off and discredit us. What Assange and WikiLeaks allowed us to do was have the evidence to go after them and to expose them. And the greatest crime in empire is to expose the truth, to expose reality, and to allow people to be able to prove the things that we already know.
No, that's a perfectly solid point, and it's one that just makes me want to just smash my head into a wall over and over and over again, because it gets tiring, like pointing out the obvious, and you understand that better than most people. We're in an era of absolute upheaval right now, and I'm gonna tell a story real quick. I live in a very small town. I live in a very small community. There's a total of like 3 or 4 stoplights throughout the entire, 4 little hamlet stretch of highway. And we're going to have a Black Lives Matter march up that highway on Saturday. There are people in my community, and I can't stress how homogenous this place is enough. Like, there's mostly freaking white people here. There's people on Facebook who are running around with their hair on fire because they're convinced that looters and rioters are going to show up in the middle of a march where it's going to be like 90 to 95% white people performing for other white people to prove that they're good woke white people, and then like 5 to 10% people who are committed to ending systemic and institutional racism. Like, that's it. That's the whole thing. George Soros isn't going to be bussing in Antifa or anything like that. In the first place, it's really hard to get here. In the second place, it would be a waste of resources. So there's people who are just losing their goddamn heads over this, and because I talk, for a living, like, I want to talk to these folks, and I have tried to say, like, okay, look, if you're worried that there might be an element that wants to do violence, and you look around and you don't see any police, one, you're probably safe, because they're the only people that show up dressed for violence. Two, if you're that concerned about your property, if you're more concerned about your property than you are, the lives and livelihoods of your fellow human beings, cheat. Put up a sign in your yard that says Black Lives Matter, or solidarity with the protests, solidarity with the, make it known that you support these people and that you trust that they aren't going to smash your shit. And you're probably going to be way more likely to do that. And I'm running into the same brick wall. What's DC like right now? Because it's been hectic lately.
Well, realistically, I would say that the DC, Maryland area has been, a hotbed of activity. There hasn't been, ever since the first week or so, the actual problems have died down. But, there's a lot of tension in the air, but there's mostly support. Here in the DC, Maryland area, there's mostly support, and Virginia, Northern Virginia, for the Black Lives Matter protest. Of course, needless to say, it's obvious there's a huge disinformation kind of program going on everywhere, an attempt to discredit it. And it's interesting you said the Soros, because I do a show with a guy who's a conservative, and he's like a person that believes all the Soros stuff, and we were talking about it today, and I said, wait a minute. I said, think about this. Logically speaking, in my opinion, it's a boogeyman. It's like boogeyman, and it's to basically discredit it. I said, but logically speaking, anyway, if every issue stands on its own merit. So if I had an organization and my organization's job was to prove that the sky was blue, it wouldn't matter whether we were getting money from Soros or the Russians or the Martians or whoever. Our argument that the sky is blue stands on its own merit. So the reality of it is this: all of these things to go after this with the whole Soros and Antifa stuff, the bottom line is this: the argument that's being made by people who support, basically, in a nutshell, a society of equality rather than a society of hierarchy. That's all it comes down to. Forget the issue of Black Lives Matter. Scratch a person who's opposes racism, and underneath you'll find a person who opposes sexism, who opposes, anti-LGBT, etc. You're talking about people who say there are two perspectives, sadly, in the United States, in our culture, and one of them is hierarchy. Some people are based on their station in the life. Some people, based on the station they were born in life, have a higher expectation of rights than others. And that's a hierarchical position. And those of us who say, no, we believe in a society of equality. Everyone has the same expectation of rights. That's what it comes down to. And all the George Soroses, the Russians, the Martians, these people are behind it. Those people are behind it. What they do is they imply that. And the same thing with Assange, he worked with the Russians, even though it's clear there's no evidence that he worked with anyone, right? But it's an attempt to imply, well, fill in the blank, Julian Assange, Black Lives Matter, whoever, they are really supported by X, whoever the evil boogeyman puppeteer is. Therefore, we have to ignore what they're saying. When the reality is, it wouldn't, there's no evidence of that, but it wouldn't matter if they were. Either their argument has merit or it doesn't. And I believe this is a deliberate attempt to avoid talking about the merit of the argument. It's an attempt to talking about the attempt to discredit Assange by saying he's supported by the Russians or he got this from the Russians is an attempt to discredit what is coming through Assange, which has proven to be factual and true every single time. And that's all that, to me, that's the whole game. We can't have you look at what Assange is putting out. We can't have you look at what the protesters are saying, because they're saying we don't want a hierarchical society. We want a society where everyone has the same expectation of rights. They don't want to get to that discussion. They just want to say, let's discredit everything. And then we don't have to really talk about the merit of their arguments.
Oh, and it's an infinite source of frustration, because I don't think Lee's a dumb guy. I think Lee has the intellectual acumen to put two and two together, and I think that it's unfortunate that that there's a tendency, especially in media, to pander to your base rather than challenge your base. And I personally think that, like, if I'm not challenging the people who watch my show, I'm doing a crap job of doing my show. And by doing that, I need to bring on people who have different points of view. I need to have people on that nobody's ever fucking heard of before, and let them throw some, let them throw some curveballs. It's and you're 100% right about that too. The entire time in 2016, when the DNC emails came out, the Podesta emails came out, the entire conversation never, at least in mainstream media, never centered around the substance of the emails. It was always one misdirect or another. And you've gotta, at least as an activist, I have to maintain a little center of hope around that cold, dead heart, um, and that hope is that, like, sooner or later, people are going to be able to see through the web of bullshit. And I do believe that, it's going to be a long, hot summer of people who were already starting to slowly wake up before the COVID hit and everyone was shoved inside and, told only to listen to, unelected members of the WHO or the CDC or Tony Fauci or Bill Gates, people who had no, at least in Bill Gates's case, no actual medical training. That we were supposed to lionize these people, treat them as saints. And because fear porn is the number one selling porn on the planet, the vast majority of people bought it. The people who didn't buy it went and armed up and stormed the state capitol, and now they're the ones cheering on the cops for cracking the skulls of protesters. A little bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, it's sad because, one of the things I've been saying, a lot of this stuff depends on the lens through which you view it. And I tend, you can view this through a lens of race, but oftentimes my inclination is to view things through the lens of economic class. And if you look at it, and this is something you don't hear anybody say, let's be honest about something. I was I don't know if you know, I was a cop for 27 years. I retired as a major. I can tell you about all that stuff. I was a commander of the investigations division, all that, internal affairs, you name it, right? All of that stuff I did. I taught criminal justice in a college. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, you know what? Here's something different, because I always like to try to look at things differently. Some billionaire is on his 450-foot yacht anchored off the coast of the Canary Islands, sucking down strawberry daiquiris for breakfast with a bunch of babes in bikinis, just riding this thing out. Meanwhile, cops are working class people, right? So you got working class people beating the crap out of other working class people. And these people are sitting there going, yeah, we can kind of handle this for a while. We can watch this. Great. So basically, they empower the police. They say to the police, look, you guys are honorary. You guys, since you are our guard dogs, you guys there to keep things in order so that we can continue to own everything and control everything. And so you get honorary elite status, so that you are protected from a prosecution. You get the honorary status of an elitist. You're not going to get the money of an elitist. You're not going to get anything, but we'll call you heroes. We'll pretend to worship you. And, if you die, who cares? We'll put a flag over your casket and give you a pretty good funeral, and everybody will see, there was flashing lights and stuff when you die. But the bottom line is this. You are like, they consider them like they're our soldiers. Yay, we're heroes, but they'll sacrifice them in a second. They're sacrificial. But they make the cops believe that they're honorary members of the elite class. And they get arrogant. And they start to say, we can do whatever we want, anytime we want to. And they actually believe that, because they believe they're honorary members of the elite class. And then they go beat the crap out of people. And for the most part, they get away with it. And the people have had enough. Let me add this. Looking at it through the lens of economic class. And I've been on a number of TV shows talking about this because I predicted this. As soon as the lockdown started, I started predicting it over and over. I said, let me tell you something. People are not going to sit in their houses. The government is, unlike a lot of other countries, our government did nothing to make them economically whole. So the people are poor. And I kept saying, they're out of time, they're out of money, they're out of food. And they're going to come out and they ain't going to be happy. and I said by June, I expect some kind of social unrest. I will add this. They're talking about a second wave. There will be a second wave of social unrest. Los Angeles County alone, they're expecting 365,000 evictions before the end of the summer. There is no way, 538,000 children, there ain't no way that you're going to have people, first of all, that'll overwhelm the courts, so they can't do it overnight. But there's no way you're going to have this many people. They're not going to have jobs. Their little bit of unemployment insurance is going to end out at the end of July. So they're going to be facing eviction. They're going to be facing starvation. They're going to be facing horrible, issues. There will be a second wave of violence. I've told the people, you guys think that Russia or Soros or whoever's behind this, well, let's see who your boogeyman's going to be at the end of the summer, because people are going to be out. There will be there. This is not, you can't have a society where you're throwing literally tens of millions of people into utter desperation. 42 million people out of work. 40% of the jobs that are gone are not expected to go to come back. That you can't throw in an entire society into desperation and expect not to have social unrest. I think this is the beginning of the social unrest. And let me add this, one more thing. The other thing I said was this. I firmly believe this. George Floyd, you had a tinderbox. George Floyd was a match thrown in a tinderbox. It was the perfect metaphor. People looked at it and they saw the system put the system's knee on somebody's neck with no mercy to the end. And they looked at it and metaphorically, intuitively, people looked at it and they saw the system with its knee on their neck. And the tinderbox was perfect. George Floyd, the match gets thrown, and it was a flashover.
So I'm here in Cleveland, and out in the protests here that took place directly following like that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then beyond, you saw as many Justice for Tremere Rice as you did I Can't Breathe signs that were out there that day. And a lot of it, like you were pointing out, has to do with far more than just this one man in this one instance. It has to do with the emotion that invokes in people that have seen that happen to their friends and their loved ones and their neighbors and their store owners near them. And I had to explain that to a coworker of mine, that it's not about this guy. It's about everyone who has been affected by this same level of violence, and everyone who recognizes this level of violence as something that will be used against them in the future, if not stopped now, but if not stopped 20 years ago. But you had mentioned about people's ability to secure food and the housing crisis and all these other things that are about to start happening and are happening. Early on here, during the U.S. onset of the coronavirus, we had talked about the need for like municipal food security, and how just that alone, how just securing food for you and your community creates such a revolutionary act. And literally builds power based on the fact that you don't have to go work a 9-to-5 job to make sure you and your family can eat. And those other systems don't need to be in place if your city can find a way to feed its own citizens. And a part of that was because I could see what was happening in Italy and where it was leading, because they were about 2 months ahead of us in the way that they locked down and the patterns that they rolled out. And the first thing to get raided was grocery stores. They literally called in the military to guard grocery stores from hungry people that didn't have money. And in Minnesota, one of the first places that we saw looting happen was people securing food for themselves because the situation's so desperate. And the hope that I have coming out of this, for whatever the hell we enter into next, is that people realize centralized power doesn't work for everyone. It only works for the people that hold it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Chris Hedges, who I'm looking forward to interviewing this Friday, has been saying that what we're seeing now is that the elite ruling class has lost legitimacy. And I'm with you on that. I think people are going to be looking more towards how can we make things more local? How, as you said, how can we secure food for our community, for our town, for our block, for, and because the bottom line is this, people are waking up to say, our government doesn't represent us and doesn't give a crap about us. In fact, just the opposite. We're talking about Assange here, and they're going after him for what? For exposing war crimes, for exposing what they're doing. They don't want to be held accountable for the international war crimes that they're doing. And when we look at this right now, it's critical that you think about foreign policy. It's very critical, and here's why. Our government tells us, look, what was this all supposedly about? This fiasco, this catastrophe that we've created in the Middle East. What was this all supposed to be about? Protecting us from terrorism. Remember that? Bin Laden's going to get us. He was a boogeyman. Saddam Hussein was a boogeyman. ISIS was a boogeyman. We got to be afraid because those people from the Middle East are going to get us. We got to spend trillions of dollars, 2 trillion, whatever we have to do a year. We got to spend all of this money to protect us because these terrorists might get us. So now you've got to ask yourself, what is the most immediate threat? What is it? Look, for the sake of argument, without disputing this or discussing this, there's a whole lot we could discuss about what is the actual threat of the coronavirus. But here's the bottom line. The official story of our government is this coronavirus is a major threat to us. And, it's a huge threat and lots of people could die. And that's our big priority. If that's the case, if their argument is right, or if they believe that, if they're going by that, then you got to ask yourself, what's all this crap about terrorism? I mean, the proximate fear, according to you, is the coronavirus. What are we doing with Venezuela? What are we screwing with Iran for? What are we doing in Iraq? What are we, Chaz? They're like, Chaz, oh, I'm against Chaz. Well, wait a minute. We're doing it in Syria. We've taken an area of Syria with their oil in it, and we've said, oh, that's our version of Chaz. We're going to own this. Syria's saying don't be there, but we're going to be there. Oh, by the way, we're going to steal the oil while we're there. Apparently, we ain't against Chaz because we're doing it on an international basis, right? But the bottom line is nobody is sticking their hand up in the mainstream media, and that's why they got to have Assange locked up, because he's the kind of person that would do that right now, that would stick his hand up and say, hold on, time out. I got a question. We're supposed to be scared to death of coronavirus, right? Yes. Then why are you spending all of our money in the Middle East going after alleged terrorism or so-called, that guy over there is a socialist, he must be stopped. Iran, they must be stopped because they're just evil or something like that. Not even sure why. But why aren't you calling all your troops home, bringing all the aircraft carriers home, and saying, you know what, the proximate proximate danger right now, the thing we got to worry about is coronavirus. So we got to put all of our money in time in that, in our resources. Either one of two things. Either you're lying and you don't really believe that it's that much of a threat, or you believe it's that much of a threat and you don't give a crap. And you're just going to keep doing what you're doing because you're making a fortune doing that. And your priorities are stealing the resources of other countries. Neither one of those is a good outcome. I'm not here to say I know which one it is. I'm just saying it's got to be one of those two things.
So interesting question, because you're someone that has a lot of experience as a law enforcement officer. What would you say the average age and health condition of officers are? Like, would you put them above 40 with more than 1 or 2 pre-existing health conditions?
25 to 35 and healthy. That's what you're going to have. That's your average age for cops. 35 and under healthy. When you get into 35 and up, a lot of times you're looking at people in the mid to higher ranks, or people who are, still in the field, but they're kind of riding it out to get towards retirement. So a lot of 35 and unders in law enforcement. But now I've been retired for 11 years. One of the things I'm seeing much more so, and again, it's as a result of these endless wars coming home. So what do you have now? You got a bunch of cops who came back from Afghanistan and Iraq and all the other, God only knows, all the other countries we're in. So now I think law enforcement has changed as far as I'm concerned to some extent. Don't get me wrong. You know, the big difference as far as violence is video cameras. That's the difference now, is video cameras. Those people who think, oh my, why are cops so much more violent now? Video cameras. That's why they're more violent now. They're not. They're just getting caught now. And look, people in minority communities and poor communities for years have been saying, my God, they're beating the crap out of us. They're doing everything. But there was no video camera, so they denied it. Now the video cameras are there and it can't be denied. That's what's changed. But again, you got a lot of people coming out of the military. They're being armed. They're being, you know, dressed like military, armed like military. So the bottom line is this: Trump was saying, I'll send in the military. They're already there. These are people who came home from the military and are equipped in the same way that they were when they were in the military. You got cops referring in the media saying, yes, the police officers are civilians. Wait a minute. Law enforcement is a civilian. If you're not in the military, in the actual military and on active duty, you are a civilian. So the concept that there's cops and civilians, they're all civilians. But that's the mentality now. It's one of a military occupation.
It carries over into the perspective that cops, as the military, view citizens as enemy combatants, as the enemy, period. And the mentality is in that fraternal order of police, it's us versus them now. Like that's how they're going into the job every day. Not, I'm a member of a peacekeeping organization that lives in the community where I work. That's not the case. They very rarely do, especially in major metropolitan areas, do we find the people who are doing the actual policing live where they work. There's no representation based on, you know, like, I know these people, I know how they think and who they are. We're neighbors, we talk. There's no accountability there. There's a guy that lives right down the end of my road who's a San Jose city cop. He gets to come back to the Redwoods every night. He has a completely different world that he travels home to, you know? So the mentality is he can leave work at work because it's not following him back. And I think that whatever happens out of this, whatever the result is, if we don't have a serious fundamental transformation of the police department and what the police do and who they are, we completely blew a massive opportunity.
Yeah. And you know, people, all the discussion of what needs to be changed, you know, to me, there's one thing, and I don't hear a discussion. And because you're looking at a guy who used to be in charge of internal investigations, I can tell you, think about this. You know, one of the things that I bring up is John Brennan. When John Brennan was in charge of the CIA was being investigated by the Senate Intelligence Committee. And while that was happening, the CIA hacked into the Senate Intelligence Committee's computers while the Senate Intelligence Committee was investigating the CIA. They found out about it. John Brennan lied and said it wasn't happening. When they finally found out about it, they said, all right, John Brennan, that's unacceptable. Now go back and investigate yourselves and tell us what happened. Well, what do you know? He found that they didn't do anything wrong. That's everybody knew that. Okay, here's my point. I'm going somewhere with this. I'm in charge of internal investigations, and you are accused of doing something wrong. I'm supposed to send this guy out who's on a bowling league with you, who went to the academy with you, who is the godfather of your kids. Yeah, investigate this guy right here and tell me whether or not he did anything wrong. No, he did nothing wrong. Already knew that. That's done. You and I are running a bank robbery ring, and they say, Garland, you know, or whatever, investigate each other. Well, what do you know? We just walked into the bank and they handed us money. We didn't rob anybody. The bottom line is this: in order to get any change at all, the police departments must be relieved of the right and the capability to investigate themselves. Let's not forget the Freddie Gray. That was a sham investigation. It was a fraud. Afterwards, Marilyn Mosby, who was the attorney, the state's attorney in Baltimore City, said, you know what? The Baltimore City Internal Investigations Unit was acting as members of the defense team. That's basically what they were doing. They were working with the defense team. Internal. It's supposed to be doing an internal investigation, a non-biased investigation to find out what happens, but they act as members of the defense team. As soon as I saw it, I knew it was the whole thing was a scam, was a sham. Freddie Gray, you saw this guy. They're putting him in this truck. The guy's leg was dragging behind him, and he was screaming out in pain. The people who saw the arrest said, yeah, they were on top of him. They had their knee on his neck. He was screaming out in pain. That guy was injured before they put him in. But conveniently, the internal investors, think about it. If they found out, if they did an investigation and say he was injured before they put him in, then you have to figure out who injured him. If you do an investigation that says after he got out of the truck, then he was injured, then somebody was responsible. Who did it? How convenient is it that an investigation finds that when he was injured is the only time that no other officers were around? Well, what do you know? It just so happened with everything that happened that when he was in a vehicle with the door closed and no other officers in the vehicle and they were transporting him, that's when the injury happened. I could have told you that was a lie. That was a scam. They did that to ensure that no officers would be prosecuted. As long as you allow police officers to investigate themselves, police departments to investigate themselves, you will get no justice. It has to go like into the AG's office, and you can absolutely not have retired police officers working for this investigative unit, because you know what's going to happen. Retired cops, they're going to get other cops off. That's what we're looking at, this scam where, in fact, this is how bad it is. And you've seen this. There's a police shooting. The police then release what was written in the police officer's incident report. And he'll just say, I came here, the guy tried to kill me and I shot him, whatever. Okay. The media will report that as though it was a non-biased fact. Here's the guy that's about to be accused of murder because he shot this guy. He simply writes something like, yeah, the guy attacked me, I didn't do it. And they read that. Okay, here's the facts. Yep. Yeah, the officer didn't do anything wrong. Oh, really? Where'd you get that evidence? It was on the police report. That's the guy that would be charged. But you pretend, and we pretend like a police department is unbiased, like a person who is facing legal jeopardy could possibly be unbiased. It is a joke. The police departments cannot be allowed to investigate themselves, and we cannot simply read the investigation, the incident report written by the officers who are involved in the activity that they could be charged for, and read that as though it's the gospel.
Well, so to parallel that into the reason we're all here tonight, that is in its own way what we're seeing with Julian's situation, where you have the U.S. intelligence meeting with the UK prosecution team for the extradition, where you have essentially the verdict already being made when it comes out. You have the convenient situations like, oh, well, we can't release him during the pandemic because he's not charged with anything. So how can we release someone if there's no crime there yet? And just other little details like that just show the abuse in this system, and the rot isn't just in the police departments. It's in the highest levels of the offices. And it really comes down to how you were saying police can't investigate themselves. War criminals can't investigate themselves. Because when an organization like WikiLeaks step forward and say, hey, look at all these crimes clearly laid out, and the responsibility to investigate those crimes is on the same institutions that are committing them, there's no justice that gets had. We experience what we are now, where we have hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths reported, and the only two people that go to jail are Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange.
You bring out a great point, and I didn't even really think about that. That is, Julian Assange exposes that our government was involved in war crimes in Iraq. Well, we all know that, but he gives us very, very explicit evidence of that, and we know that the entire system was involved. The intelligence community was involved in setting up the lies and propaganda to make it happen, even during it and afterwards, to try to hide the things that happened. And Assange comes along, WikiLeaks comes along, and they expose the lies and the violence. And now the very people that he exposed, we're expected to believe that they're doing this unbiased investigation and prosecution against him. When the fact of the matter is, he's exposed their dirt. He's exposed that they've done wrong. They're not capable of doing an unbiased investigation. And when we talk about criminal justice reform, which is, the whole concept, the whole George Floyd protest, it's not just criminal justice reform on a street level, not just criminal justice reform on a foundational level in the community. We need criminal justice reform all the way up to the top, involving our international court and international activities. When we look at our government, the so-called anti-Trump people saying, "Oh, we've got to get Trump out," as they're giving him more power. They're giving the government more power. They're renewing the FISA warrants with even more power. The FISA legislation. They're renewing all of these, the investigative and the wiretapping and all of the ability to the censorship stuff and propaganda powers that our international security state has, and giving Donald Trump more money to do these things with. So I'm like, well, gee, you're trying to stop him. What are you going to do? Like smother him in money? You're going to flood him with money till he just gets buried under trillions of dollars and smothers him? That must be their plan. So they're giving him more power. But the bottom line is, because he's exposing the whole system, the so-called anti-Trump Democratic Party. He's exposed them for their dirt. He's exposed the entire system. He's exposed, and so right now the system is like, look, we have to shut the mouth of Julian Assange, and we do that with propaganda. And so we have all these people running around. I remember I was in I've been in rooms with people who are political operatives, and they feel like they're doing good work. And I remember saying something to somebody just prior to the election, like days before the election, and they had this room they were working on to stop voter suppression. And I mentioned Assange, and they said, "He's a rapist." And I said, "Tell me about the case." "Oh, well, I'm not really sure." "I know a whole lot about the case. Tell me about the case." I mean, for God's sake, you just said the man's a rapist. I know you wouldn't make an accusation like that unless you were familiar with the case. Propaganda works when people believe something and they believe it was their idea. But when you question them about it, they know nothing about it. The propaganda has been very, very effective against Julian Assange. And the big plan with him, the big thing they want to do is make sure that there are no little Julian Assanges running around now saying, "I want to be like him." They want people to say, they want to make an example out of Julian Assange. So no one wants to be a martyr like Julian Assange. That's the big thing they're doing here. And they're exposing that there is no justice to be had through this Five Eyes, international security state. That they're not even interested in justice. That's the last thing on their mind.
Yeah, this has been a real-time presentation of how to completely erode the rule of law internationally. And the revelations that first came out through El País, and then the Gray Zone found out some more to add about UC Global and Sheldon Adelson and the relentless violations of international UK and US civil liberties that took place there. The fact that they were willing to go and try and steal a diaper just to have one more thing to hold over Julian's head shows the level of depravity, but also the level of fear that these guys must be operating under at all times. And you're right, they do not want another WikiLeaks. They do not want another Julian Assange. So I think this is a perfectly good point, or good opportunity to encourage that. Like, if you have tech skills and you can find yourself some backers who would have both the legal and financial wherewithal to help sustain the life of a whistleblower if need be, do that damn thing. Do it, because I refuse to give these fucks what they want. Pardon my language, but I refuse. I refuse to let them have all of their way. That's just like the first time I had my head split open by a cop at a protest was during the WTO protests in 1999. That was supposed to be a deterrent, Garland. It did not. It just made me go on to organize more things, to get louder about it. And I don't know, maybe I'm being dumb on that, but I can't in good conscience sit back and be like, well, they got him. We tried. Fuck, is baseball on? Like, I can't do that.
Well, I think one of the things they're experiencing now, as Alan Watts always said, nothing makes a tree grow like pruning it. And I think one of the things they're experiencing now is just that. They've been trying to shut everything down. They've been trying to quiet people down, shut people's mouths. And I think something that's happening now is really going to be, it's really amazing. People we're seeing millions of people who've never gotten involved in any of these activities before, who've never been activists or taken to the street, who've seen a grave injustice, and now they're not going to be able to close their eyes. And now they've been see, two things have happened. Number one, these people saw an injustice and said, okay, we'll take to the streets. And they saw how the machine reacts. We're going to beat you in the head. We're going to kick you, stomp you, spray you. We're going to physically abuse you. We're going to threaten to send in the military. And they woke people up. They're waking people up to the point where, like, when people are throwing these statues overboard, what is that about? That's about people saying, you guys do not have any legitimacy. We can't go to you and say, will you please, this guy was a murderous, rapist, Columbus, a horrible person, or these people, these Confederate people, they were fascists. They were fascist traitors. But you know what? But we can't ask you to address that and get rid of these monuments or these statues because you're not legitimate. You're not going to do it. You don't speak for us. So it's gotten to a point where people in the street are saying, we do not trust our government to do the things that we want to do, so we're going to do it ourselves. That's a turning point. I'm not saying I'm pro-violence or anything like that. I am watching what I'm seeing. And ordinary, average people who are not activists like you and I, who have not been outraged like you and I, have woken up to everything that's going around them, and they're outraged. And they're not going to be able to put that horse back in the barn. That's out. And now people like us who are probably, our phones are tapped and we're censored and everything else. Now people like us, they're going to start listening to this stuff. They're going to start listening to us, and they're going to start going to some of this indie media. They're going to be online getting involved in activism. And so I think they've opened a waterfall that, a Pandora's box, they're not going to be able to close up. And it was, as I said, George Floyd was the match. It was a grave injustice for all to see at a time when people were locked in. And everybody's like, there's no games on. There's nothing to do. Let's see here's a viral video. Let me check this. Holy Jesus, what is this? And people saw it. So I think we're at a turning point in history. And it's going to be a turning point for activism. And hopefully, not hopefully, people like us have to ensure that the people who are out now start to understand that Julian Assange is a big part of this. And the people doing it work like Julian Assange must be protected by us, because they're not going to be protected by the system, and they're not going to get justice under the system. They're going to get persecution.
So one of the big things I wish that I had saw with the reopening of the world and with the coronavirus is, and especially in this time, progressive comedians that used to tour and pull big audiences and bring political ideas together have stopped doing that, at least in this moment, or are doing it in different ways. And this kind of seems like a weird thing, but in this moment, I think having the live Jimmy Dore shows and the live Lee Camps and the live Krishes and Rons and Grahams and Tim Blacks even going around the country building this political fervor about specific issues, I think is super important. So what I really hope to see here as summer kind of progresses forward is that these, I don't want to call them like the icons of left-wing media, but these people that put themselves out there and built a career around rousing people's spirits, get back out there and start doing that again. Because that created, for the few that I've been to, such a pivotal moment of connecting with people and being able to say, hey, I just met 6 people within my city that are all working on this same project or all share the same idea. So I don't know, maybe that's something we'll see down the road, but it's just like, I miss seeing those kinds of like underground political events and almost conventions happening regularly.
Well, what you said is very, very powerful, because let's face it, the Jimmy Dores and, like I said, like we were saying, the Jamal Thomases of the world and the Graham Elwoods, et cetera, right? Kyle Kalinske, there's so many people out there. That's the only chance people have to get some truth now. That's the only chance people have to hear someone who will push back against the system. You know, it's funny you're talking about the comedians, because we've got people now. I can't even watch Saturday Night Live. I'm on the left. Certainly, I'm no fan of Trump, but I don't want to turn on the TV and just hear basically Democratic Party spokespeople. You know, I got my issues with the Democratic Party, and I got my issues with the Republican Party. So I don't want to just turn on what's supposed to be comedy. I was a big Garland fan, a Richard Pryor fan, people who challenge the system, you know, Lenny Bruce, etc., people who win against the system, who would challenge all the things that people held sacred. These guys would come out and they'd go at it. And I love that stuff. The comedians now, you turn on the late night, talk shows, and they just got a bunch of anti-Trump rhetoric. Who cares? That's not funny to me. That's too easy. You turn on basically any of your award shows, and some guy comes up and says, F Trump. And there's a rousing they get a rousing applause.
Yeah.
How easy is that? We need some people that are going to challenge the system. Huh?
For the laziest jokes, they're rewarded. I have always thought the holy trinity of comedy was Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, and George Carlin, and then like special sainthood, I guess, lower demigod status should be awarded to Dave Chappelle and to Bill Hicks and to Patrice O'Neill. We need those voices. We do. We like just as human beings, but we need people to stop doing lazy comedy, lazy journalism. You're right. They are,
mouthpieces for the system. You know what I mean? It's not even comedy anymore. It's simply system talking points. But as we were talking about a few minutes ago, this alternative stuff, the Jimmy Dores et al. Of the world, right? That's what we have now. And we have the opportunity to see these other options. And, you know, the other part of it is this, just like they're going after Julian Assange, there's a big push for censorship on the internet. And they just simply say, oh, yeah, you're evil. We have the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Lab, who are now acting as arbiters of what's good and bad and right and wrong on Facebook. They're taking out, oh, well, you're a Russian bot, you're an Iranian bot, and you're a Venezuelan bot. No, even if they were, people can choose to watch it doesn't matter. The elites don't want people to do is have the choice to watch whatever they want and to evaluate on their own whether they believe it or not. They've got a very narrow and very specific set of talking points, and the goal is to ensure that that's the only thing we get to see. And sadly, it has been working, but I think what's going on now with the George Floyd protest and what we will see going into the future will be some challenges to this, and people like us have to ensure that Julian Assange's name is in the mix, that it's not just a George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or whoever it happens to be, that we've got to ensure that people understand the importance of protecting the independent media. And you know, it's Assange, next it's Jimmy Dore, next it's, you know, whoever, Graham Elwood, next it's Kyle Kalinske. If they can take him out, then they just start working their way down and they clear us all out.
We try very, very hard to get across the point that no matter what your cause is, no matter what your activism is, it is dependent on a free flow of information and the ability to read uncensored and as unredacted as possible information. And that's why your movement needs to be supportive of Julian Assange. You can't have one without the other. You can't. Garland, I know you got to run, and I want to thank you so much. This has been fantastic. The audience loved it. I thought it was killer. So thank you very much. Please come back, and hopefully we'll be able to connect with you on Fault Lines when we're back in DC. Will you please tell people where they can find all of your programs?
Certainly. My morning show, which is Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan, it's me and a conservative guy, and we battle it out over a bunch of issues. And I think that's healthy. That's healthy for democracy. You know, that's healthy for people to disagree and have both sides of the issue. So that's on Radio Sputnik every morning. So you can just search online for Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan. Every Friday from 6 to 7 p.m., I'm on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. That's Pacifica. And what I'd advise you to do is just search News Views WPFW or News Views Pacifica podcast, and my shows. There's a bunch of places like Player FM, and you can find a bunch of but it's called News Views. Search News Views Garland Nixon or WPFW podcast, and you'll find several different sites. But I like Player FM the best, and you can listen to some of my shows where I rant and rave on Pacifica. I particularly like those.
Hell yeah. Well, yeah, thank you again. Really do appreciate it. And everybody else stick around because we've got a ton of news to cover. Garland, the only thing you need to do to get out of Jitsi is to just close the particular tab that's open. I don't know. You're welcome to hang out for news too.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. And I look forward to coming back again.
Heck yeah. Garland Nixon, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, lastly, on Twitter, at Garland Nixon. That's the great thing about having the name like Garland Nixon. You can always get it. So Twitter is at Garland Nixon. Facebook is Garland Nixon. And anyone can email me. It's my first name and the first letter of my last name, garlandn@gmail.com. Thanks a lot, my friend.
All right. Thank you. And yeah, hell yeah, dude. Garland Nixon. That was awesome. We should definitely do that again. If you want to go to the story that we were going to cover with Garland, but we didn't cover with Garland because we were having a good talk, we can jump to that first.
Absolutely. So we were planning on talking with Garland about this, but like Steve said, it was just too good. It didn't really fit in with everything else going on. But Julian recently got to do a phone call with Giannis. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
Giannis Varoufakis.
I'm not pronouncing the last name. First name's Giannis. He is the founder and one of the members of, I believe, Dine 25, which is a European protest organization and public awareness organization. Julian's reached out and done a couple calls with him. And this was the most recent one that I believe took place on June 13th.
So it starts out, Julian called me a little earlier on at 14:22 London time from Belmarsh High Security Prison. This is not the first time, but as you can imagine, every time I hear his voice, I feel honored and moved that he should dial my number when he has such few and far between opportunities to place phone calls. Julian said, I want a perspective on world developments out there. I have none in here. And look, we talked about it at the top of the show. He just got a radio that really will be his first ability to hear even, outside propaganda. The article continues in a feeble attempt to paint a picture for him as broad a canvas as possible. I shared with Julian my main thought of the last weeks. Never before has the world of money, i.e. the money markets that include the share markets, have been so decoupled from the world of real people, real stuff, from the real economy. We watch in awe as GDP, personal income, wages, company revenues, businesses, small and large, collapse while the stock market is staying relatively unscathed. The other day, Hertz declared bankruptcy. When a company does this, its share price goes to zero. Not now. In fact, Hertz is about to issue $1 billion worth of new shares. Why would anyone buy shares of an officially bankrupt company? The answer is because central banks print mountain ranges of money and give it for almost free to financiers to buy any piece of junk floating around the stock exchange. Complete zombification of the corporations is how I put it to Julian. Julian commented that this proves that governments and central banks can keep corporations afloat even when they sell next to nothing at the marketplace. I agreed, but I also pointed out a major conundrum that capitalism faces for the first time. It is this. Central bank money printing keeps asset prices very high while the price of stuff and wages fall. This disconnect can go on growing. But when Hertz, British Airways, etc. can survive in this manner, they have no reason not to fire half the workforce and to cut the wages for the other half. This creates more deflation and depression in the real economy, which means that central banks must print more and more to keep asset and share prices high. At some point, the masses out there will rebel and governments will be under pressure to divert some income to them. This will deflate asset prices. At that point, because the assets are used by corporations as collateral for all the loans they take out to stay afloat, they will lose access to liquidity. A sequence of corporate failures will commence under circumstances of stagnation. I don't think capitalism can easily survive, at least not without huge social and geopolitical conflicts. This conundrum. Julian thought about it for a moment, and he asked me, how important is consumption to capitalism? What percentage of GDP is at stake if consumption does not recover? Do corporations need workers or customers? Which, y'all, that's why we like the guy. I answered that it was high enough to make this conundrum real. Yes, central banks and robots can keep the corporations going without customers or workers, but robots cannot buy the stuff they produce. So this is not a stable equilibrium. The losses in people's incomes will accelerate, thus generating pivotal discontent. Julian then said something along the lines of, that will benefit Trump, who knows how to feed off the anger of the multitudes towards the educated upper middle class elites. I agreed entirely. I agreed saying that DM25 has been warning since 2016 that socialism for the oligarchy and austerity for the many in the end feeds the racist ultra-right. That we are experiencing again what happened in the 1920s in Italy with the rise of Mussolini. Julian agreed entirely and said, yes, like then, there's an alliance forming between rich people and the discontented working class. He then added that most of the prisoners and prison officers in Belmarsh support Trump. At that point, the connection was cut off. And look, man, let's kind of dissect that a little bit, because there's some fascinating points that Julian raised there. Andre?
Yeah. So I mean, every point in there really hits it home best. But the part that's the most chilling to me is the thing that we've also been calling out here, and that is seeing Trump rise to power in this way and the things that are happening around him that are facilitating that growth. Because ultimately, the political elite don't have an ideology; they just have to remain in power. So if they can piss a certain group off and then move to secure power within that group as their lackeys, so to speak, like having the poor, dumb, racist white people being the foot soldiers for the elites, that's what they'll do. And it's something that's been proven throughout history. So the simple recognition of that, I think, is super spot on. But I would compare it personally more to the rise of Hitler than the rise of Mussolini.
I'm not super well educated in Italy coming out of World War One, so I can't really speak to that one way or the other. I forgot to do this during the interview with Garland, but got a $100 super chat from Mermiar in the Panhandle, and I want to thank you very much for that. All of the super chats that go to Slow News Day are going to get rolled over into the A for A GoFundMe. Although I will say that with the caveat that it is your dollar goes much further if you donate directly to the GoFundMe, as opposed to giving a super chat. Like, I love the super chats to give me that dopamine hit. Like, hey, somebody wants to like spend money on the show. That's fucking wild. Awesome. Appreciate it. Love you. But in terms of trying to, fundraise to get to DC, YouTube takes a hell of a vig. GoFundMe takes 10% as opposed to like the 40 that YouTube takes. So please do, God, I love you for that. If you want your dollar to go further, donate directly to the GoFundMe.
So, do you want to play the Black Lives Matter video now, Steve? Julian's statements on Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, that's on Sleepy Josh if we want to be able to run it through the video player, though. Okay.
The Black Lives Matter movement has come up, yes, by hard work for activists, but the core of what is driving it is footage that is undeniable. It's not a matter of, you know, do you believe the police, do you believe the friends of the person who was shot, the witnesses? No, there's undeniable footage of exactly what has occurred, and that is not only stimulating parts of the black community. I think the black community has understood this for all too long, actually. But it's stimulating enormous acceptance and sympathy outside the black community because their argument is proven.
And I think, so the best example to this, and it's something that I put a video together, we released it for like an hour and we pulled it back just to make some changes. But the similarities that you see between Collateral Murder and the TMZ release of the police talking. And really the biggest difference, and just in case you're not familiar, it was after the police in New York had run protesters over with a vehicle. There was some cops there that basically started shouting at a separate incident to run people over or to shoot them and multiple other things. And comparing that to Collateral Murder, like it shows that there is this level of outrage that people have against this level of systemic violence, whether it's happening here in the United States or overseas. And it's just a matter of getting that in front of them for them to see what's happening.
No, you're absolutely right. And the language of collateral murder being heard on NYPD cop radio is just one of the things that helps underscore the reality that as soldiers come back from our forever wars, they disproportionately go into law enforcement or security positions. It sucks because cops are like the least likely profession for self-introspection or PTSD therapy. They're high candidates for suicide and high candidates for domestically abusing their partners. And when you have trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, or war crime on top of wartime, war crime on top of war crime, and then you come home and you get a whole new set of weapons, including tear gas, which is a war crime internationally, that you then get to unleash on unarmed protesters. Like, I can't imagine what goes through a cop with any sense of humanity's mind. You know, I know what goes through the minds of like all of the cops that I'm at, and that's usually like, we get to go fucking bust some people up. You know, but that manifests in a lot of people ending up eating their gun, and a lot of people end up drunks and beating the shit out of their spouse as a way to shake it off.
And it's easy to, and I'm not someone that's ever been in a position where I feel like I've actually been victimized because of insert personal characteristic. Obviously, like I'm a white dude. But the fact that it's allowed to happen and proliferate, but at the same time, there's such suppression and rejection. We can't necessarily blame each individual officer, and let me finish this because it gets to the point, but we can't blame each individual officer for what we now see as this systemically poisoned system, because there's been years of propaganda since like the 70s that shows like cops have existed, that we've waged endless wars, and these people come back home and then find some solace in the fact that they can continue to act in monstrous ways like they had in other countries. So it's an individual level, but to the larger extent, it's the fact that these systems have been created and people have been propagandized to believe that it's okay for an officer to respond this way, to the point that we subsidize the making of TV. We as the government subsidize the making of TV shows like Cops and like Law and Order and those things that literally they get paid to produce, working in conjunction with cities. But we are joined by our good friend Jason Burmis. How are you doing today, buddy?
I am doing well, my friend. How are you doing?
Oh, doing wonderful. Thank you for hopping in. We were just wrapping up talking about this statement that Julian had put out about Black Lives Matter a while ago. And the gist of it, and I'd like to see if you wanted to weigh in, is that it's not a personal decision issue or a cop said versus the friends of the victim said. This is the raw presented video of what happened. Make your decision. And that's why people are responding largely the way they are, because it is, hey, view this, and then what do you think about it?
Well, I think that the raw footage is important, but I also think, especially in this case, some kind of context is also important. Why? Well, basically because it looks like they knew each other personally, as in they worked together for some time. So for those that are not aware, Derek Chauvin worked at a club as the police officer on duty for 17 plus years, the one that ended up burning down later. And it turns out that at least at some point, George Floyd also worked security there. Now, earlier this week, on top of the reports that were out there and several people talking about it, CBS News got one of the security guards to go on a 50-minute interview. Now, they only showed about a 90-second excerpt of it, but he said that they knew each other pretty well and that Derek and he did not like one another, and that Chauvin sometimes was quick to be rough with customers, pull out the mace, etc. And Floyd didn't like that, apparently. That's the gist of what they cut up. But then they also said that they contacted the family members of Floyd, and they said in part, they said that it could have been personal as well. All right, so now I want to take that into account. Now, there are two things that could happen with that. Number one, the next day, the security guard that gave the 50-minute interview, he recanted his story. He said he was mistaken and that he was thinking of somebody else. It wasn't necessarily George Floyd. Now, some have suggested if they did, in fact, know each other and not like each other, that could escalate it to premeditated or first-degree murder on Derek Chauvin's part. Okay, as in he did it on purpose because there was some kind of a grudge. Now, on the other end of that spectrum, when this thing goes to trial, I would imagine that the defense's argument, on top of the videos that show that, Floyd resisted initial arrest to go into the car, that he had, dropped drugs and acted nutty, is that Chauvin and he didn't get along, and he was very frightened because Floyd was 6'7", etc. So, in my mind, at least at this point, no matter what you believe about it, nobody's going to be satisfied. And after you've seen these riots now in America, if Chauvin isn't convicted, I think the riots will be worse after those trials. And on the other side of that spectrum, I think that if he does get fully convicted, there'll be a certain amount of people that have his back too. And it's just going to continue this right-left divide. When I think there are actual solutions that we could get to now with all this, I guess, spotlight on they're saying defund the police. I don't think that's a good idea. I think demilitarize the police. Yes. I think
that's part of the defunding. Like, defunding is just the way to grab people's attention. And yes, while defund, it's one of those things where, like, look, I understand it may not resonate as a catchphrase. Demilitarize the police has been a hashtag before. It has been a talking point before. It's been part of people's campaigns. But what that has gotten us is more militarized police and more money spent militarizing the police. So it's a tactic, and I understand that it doesn't resonate with everyone, but you at least look at it and you're like, the fuck, you know.
My problem is, look, right now, for instance, so let's talk about it. In New York, Cuomo's given these press conferences, right? And he's signing executive orders all over the place, and he's highlighting the militarization of the police. And when he's doing that, of course, it's very hard for me to argue with him. You know, I have to be in agreement. I'm like, well, that sounds good. But then in the same breath, he is being an authoritarian and threatening local governments that he will cut their funding if they do not enforce his draconian regulations on businesses, and then bragged about the 25,000 calls that he got on restaurants and bars that were not social distancing, over 16,000 establishments, and threatened to take people's liquor licenses. He also said if police officers and their units don't want to wear masks, that he will just shut them down. He will fund them directly. So that's my issue. You see what I'm saying here? Look,
No, I do, and look, it's possible that every mayor or governor, it certainly mine is as dumb and corrupt as Cuomo. You know, it's possible. But at least in Santa Cruz, like, we're in charge of the Santa Cruz Police Department. Ostensibly with the purse, we are. We're you know, it's a municipally funded entity. And they take up 63% of our budget in a college town, and then some subsequent communities that are, you know, more or less like cottage style vacation places. And still 63% of our budget is ate up by the police department. That's absolute insanity to me.
I'm not saying that the police, first of all, I want to say this. I think that we do have to find a better way to hold police brutality accountable. It's always made me sick. It's an issue. I've talked about police corruption as well. You know, the body cams can't just go off. And then when you do have something controversial that happens, I think the first thing you should do is take it out of not only that municipality, but possibly that state. You know, put them in like a lotterized community to get their fair trial. So there isn't the cronyism, the local cronyism that there's going to be. I mean, it's tough to stop it nationally. I know the internet's out there, but at least a jury of their peers in another state might find it very, very different. And if you can somehow randomize that. My other fear of this whole thing is that, look, guys, you got motherfucking Spot, the fucking Boston Dynamics DARPA robot running around Singapore with multiple attachments ready to go on the top of that thing, telling them to stay 3 feet a fucking apart. All right? You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to see this being like, well, we can defund it this way because Spot, the fucking DARPA robot, only costs a one-time fee of $210,000, and he's going to fucking fix us up in 3 months on shifts of people over in the park that are policing people, and he's going to get the record, and, you know, there's no way he can have any brutality. It's the bringing in of AI, dehumanization, the automation nation in so many ways, and we divide each other by race. In my opinion, the most fucking arbitrary issue in the world. I got news for you guys. It does. You see how my skin's a little more tan than Steve's here? Guess who cares at the top? No fucking buddy. No fucking buddy. They're sitting there cackling and laughing. They don't care. They just want to make sure they can oppress the masses, whether they're black, white, Asian, Native American. I mean, you name it. That's the name of the game. And when you got a guy like Julian Assange, again, in prison on a fake indictment that doesn't even mention the war crimes and the videos that he exposes, right? That's choo-choo training along. And the media is not only not covering that, but not covering what he's saying about this pandemic, saying what's going on. We live in the bizarre, man. I'm almost ready to go to the Chaz. My brother suggested against it, but I'm really considering it.
I would recommend going there and being the best on the ground reporter that could possibly show up in there. So I am in full support of you going to the Chaz, and I am a couple days away from definitely trying to get out there and joining you personally. I just have to have my boss okay with me leaving.
About it. You know, a lot of people have said, well, my brother said, look, all it takes is one person to point at you and say it's that right wing guy. And I'm like, look, man, I've always been good at getting out of situations, using my mouth. I'm no right winger. I've never been a friend to the right wing. I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And he's like, look, man, it doesn't even matter. He's like, you're just different than them. And I said, I challenge that. I feel like there's going to be more of an atmosphere. And if somebody gets violent with me, man, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll be live streaming while it happens because, you know, I'm not going to back down. And
make sure you point the camera at their boots.
What's that?
Like, so that, make sure you point the camera at their boots so we can see if they're a cop or not as they're coming at you.
Well, I mean, at this point, the cop boots are probably off. They got a nice pair of Timberlands or something like that, steel toes just in case. Look, man, we're just in wild times. It's just, this is the other thing. I'm no right winger, right? But I know when I see a headline this week that Trump mega rally is perfect storm for coronavirus spread after the last 3 weeks of literally arm-to-arm protests in multiple cities all throughout the country and not a word.
The word was beating racism is more important than the coronavirus. The dictate was we need to solve racism, and we're just going to put the coronavirus on pause for a little bit, and then when it comes back around, we're still going to blame the people who went and stormed the Michigan State Capitol with guns, and we'll find a way to blame Donald Trump. And I'm not any kind of a right winger. You know me, man. Like I'm way down in that like political compass thing. I'm way down in the lower left hand corner. It's like me and Emma Goldman and an AR-15, and like that's it. It's the whole fucking box, you know.
Well, you know what, guys? I'll say this right before you came on. I'm not sure you've seen this because this is a parent conversation that Julian had a few days ago. But if you read it, and it basically goes into what's going to happen here. And we haven't really seen the economic repercussions in this. I think this whole defund the police. Listen, the police were already getting cut. Cuomo was already talking about it. They were already getting cut. Healthcare is already getting cut. Education's already getting cut. They propped up, this is a must read, where it talks about propping up an economy with markets that prop up corporations that really aren't selling anything. And then, you know, arbitrarily, all the other money is just printed out of nowhere to just give to everybody. For instance, Hertz went bankrupt this week, and then they put $1 billion valuation of new shares on the market. How is that possible? Like, and he says, you know, they're going to basically do this. They're going to fire half the people and then cut the wages on the next people. This is, to me, the birth of the idea of a UBI. You just got a bunch of people really accustomed to being on the dole and making more money than when they worked, those people, right? Then you had all these people that worked so hard forever and their small business got eviscerated, or, you know, their teaching job is going to get taken from them. Their pension is now in question. Whatever they invested in their 401k, who knows? It's been up, down, up, down, up, down. But at the end, it doesn't look good for them. They'd have to take whatever is offered. And you stack that on top of mail-in voting across the country. I mean, 2020 is fucking wild.
So there's a reason that I tell people all the time that we live in a fucking cartoon. And every day there seems to be more and more reason to back up that assertion. I had a really bad joke out of that sentence. Anywho, this is going to be the first election, Jason, that I can remember where no matter who wins, like 75 to 85% of the country isn't going to believe the results. And we've got to take that and we've got to add record unemployment to it. We've got to add the fact that there still hasn't been like a real second round of corona checks, you know?
And here's the thing. I don't know if you guys saw this headline yet, but Beijing just started locking people down again, rounding them up and locking them down.
In the
That's
middle
why
of the summer.
go out of here. Listen, I went and took a big drive today, guys, out in the country. It was like the best thing. It was so relaxing. Well, I went and saw my brother. We went to a restaurant where like nobody had a mask on except for the guy behind the bar. And then when he realized it was my brother, he took it off. And everybody was cool. Even the couple that was 85, 90 years old, when they walked off, they didn't walk off with a mask. The guy touched my chair. He wasn't scared. We enjoyed it. You know, this little place that I'm not even going to, I wouldn't want Cuomo to take him out. He's threatening liquor licenses.
No, keep that one under your hat.
I mean, that's the real deal. And I need out of this state. And I wonder, are we going to fight back in round two? Because round two is coming. The people that want the lockdown to continue believe it.
I don't think they can actually get around two. I don't think that in this moment, that when they try to say, okay, go back in your house, everything's shutting down, that people are going to do that. I think that people will realize the reason they're locking down is because so many other people care about these issues and because there's so many people in the streets. Because we're already seeing in Seattle, protesters getting arrested 3, 4, 5 days later after not even interacting with the police, but just for being at the protests. People are getting picked up out of their cars. They're losing their jobs. So the surveillance state is working, and that's the thing that we're ultimately going to have to push back against.
Well, but let me ask this. What happens if this time around they release something that's more deadly? You ask how they get people to stay inside. What if people actually start dropping dead on this round? All I'm saying is this whole fucking thing has been shady from the beginning, right? You look at it, you look at the HIV insert, you look at the fact that today the headline, by the way, is, what's the headline today? Oh, the stock market went up. Why? Well, because we have a coronavirus steroid that now works. Did you guys see that? Let's do it. On
the heels of banning hydrochlorococaine or whatever the fuck it is.
Well, again, and that's the thing, the medical tyranny that has gone on around this coronavirus steroid. Let's type it in. But that was the big thing today. Now it's okay to say this. Common drug reduces deaths even with people on vents. And now it's a scientist in Britain, and it's a study. It's a steroid called dexamethasone. Now,
oh, neat.
All I'm saying is, from the get-go, I said what? Intrafusions of vitamin C and steroid treatment. I think I talked about methylprednisolone they were using down in New York. Why is this stuff never even talked about? Why are we living in a time where doctors that say they injected antibiotics into their patients and they survived, why are they getting taken down on YouTube? The medical martial law on this is extremely scary. The fact that they quarantine you away from your family is also very scary. And then you don't get the choice. So all I'm saying is, Andrew, I don't think, number one, there are, it may be detached for you, but here in New York, there are still people that are scared shitless. I want to assure you, like, there are still people that are really scared. And it's weird to be around. I'm still in the twilight zone a lot of the time. The further downstate I go, the further twilight zone like it is.
Yo, right? This is Santa Cruz County, man. Like, in the same way that Ronald Reagan said that Orange County is where good Republicans went to die, like, Santa Cruz is where good liberals go when they've, amassed enough fortune to buy a house here. It's nuts, man. Like, they're organizing marches, and the first 5 things on the flyer for marches are about you have to have a mask, you have to respect social distancing, blah, blah, blah. Like this, it's all COVID related. There are people who are still, screaming murderer at people who don't wear masks in public. Not in a store or in a restaurant, just in public.
Again, I have a governor that is threatening businesses with the way they have opened up. And let me tell you something. It's going to be selectively enforced. It has to be. And I just want to say this. Props to my chief of police that hasn't worn a fucking mask one time and still isn't wearing one. Thank you, man. We need more of you to stand up. Because where are our elected officials? That's the thing. This is a constitutional republic. This isn't mob rule. And our local governments have to be the strongest ones. And that's what decentralization is. And the problem is we allowed centralization in this country post World War II to continue on and on and on and on to the point we are now in a situation where a very few handful of corporations working with the government and oligarchs, the predator class, dictate reality. And every time there's a pushback, it seems like they got a plan for it. And don't get me wrong, there's some factions in there that disagree a little bit. But even a guy like Peter Thiel, right, who supposedly had Trump's back, well, he doesn't have his back no more.
Well, look, Peter Thiel got everything he wanted, Jason. He got healthcare contracts in 3 of the 5 Five Eyes countries. He got massive expansion of his surveillance gear in 3 of the 5 Five Eyes countries. He didn't need Donald Trump anymore.
You know, the thing is that's my problem. You get these people that get behind these supposed billionaires that are the good guys. Peter Thiel's not a good guy, just like Eric Schmidt's not a good guy. You know, 2 steering members on the Bilderberg committee. And I mean, the other craziness about this, if you think about it, right? A lot of people are talking about this great reset and the upcoming Davos, and that's when, you know, they're going to get together, and it's going to be a big show, man, because even the elites on some level have, you know, tried to instill fear in whatever communities by not meeting, right? There's going to be no Bohemian Grove this year. Bilderberg is postponed, but that probably means, you know, it's done like Coachella style. We'll see you next year, or even dirt cheap. You know, it's a very, I'll say this, Dana White, I did a video on Dana White last week, right? It was a post-fight press conference. Dana White, don't get me wrong, notorious liar, smart businessman, but he said something so damn true. He goes, look, these are uncertain times. He goes, I hate to be Mr. Negative, but I don't think we've seen the worst of this thing yet. He goes, think about it right now. He goes, he's like 40 million people plus, they're not working, and somehow the stock market's up. He goes, that makes no fucking sense. What's going to happen? And he goes, well, there's going to be massive layoffs. He goes, then there's going to be bankruptcies, and then there's going to be foreclosures. And then he goes, and then who knows what the fuck happens with this virus? He goes, talk about uncertain times. He's like, yeah, they're pretty uncertain right now. And I said, man, you know, Dana, I say a lot about you, but spot mother trucking on, friend. So, you know, and that's probably, you know, that's a week and a half ago during these riots. That I don't want to say riots because a lot of them are protests, but the riot flavor and the unaccountability on that is also going to have a sour taste in so many people's mouth. A lot of people don't like seeing an elderly grandfather lying on the sidewalk dying for some TVs. Okay. A lot of people don't like seeing some guy who they can't see their face. They can't see anything but maybe their, you know, the underside of their eyes and maybe a small part of their arm roll up on somebody and baton them in the back of the head. Or I don't like seeing my friend Dan Dix, who's all of 5'4" and 135 pounds, have a bottle pounced off of his head as he's being escorted away from police because there's a mob of 100 people that want his head. I don't like seeing that. You know, it's a wild time. And if you had told me this was going to happen in May or June, I may have believed you. If you told me this in March when everything was going down, I would not have believed that it was anything but the coronavirus. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
real quick, I got to throw this by you. You said a great comment in the chat. If Bohemian Grove is closed, let's take it over and turn it into an autonomous zone.
You know what? Poikinen, that made me your most brilliant. See, here's the thing. If we wanted that as an autonomous zone, this would be used in court 5 years from now to put you in prison forever for any fraction.
And there would absolutely be no connection between Steve and the people who did it. That would be the best part. It would basically be like Bohemian Gate. But so I did want to transition here because we love punching at Mike Pompeo because he's just a piece of shit. So the Trump administration has started targeting members of the International Criminal Court that are investigating the United States war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you want to jump in and read a little bit of this, Steve? It doesn't go too far down until it gets to the meat.
Sure. Let me make sure I've got there. We go. The Trump administration has launched an economic and legal offensive on the International Criminal Court in response to the court's decision to open an investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan carried out by all sides, including the U.S. The U.S. will not just sanction ICC officials involved in the investigation of alleged war crimes by the U.S. and its allies. It will also impose visa restrictions on the families of those officials. Additionally, the administration declared on Thursday that it was launching a counter investigation into the ICC for alleged corruption. Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien, Defense Secretary, and Mark Esper, the Attorney General. Oh, I'm reading that all fucking wrong. Anywho, Pompeo, Robert O'Brien, Mark Esper, and Billy Barr gave a presentation on the decision at the State Department, but then left without taking any questions. I'm gonna like.
I wonder if they had like a PowerPoint presentation when they were doing this. Like if they put like the dudes killing people in the collateral murder video, and they were like, "Nah, that's not us." Like I never saw that before in my life.
This is this is just wild, dude. Barr said Thursday's measures were an important first step in holding the ICC accountable for exceeding its mandate and violating the sovereignty of the United States. Jason, I got to get your take on that sentence.
Here's the thing. All bets are off, my friend. So again, we're in bizarro world, right? So on one level, the ICC panel, a function of the United Nations, is exposing real corruption and war crimes once again against the United States. They're also, again, the United Nations, the ones that put on the hearings for the OPCW, where our administration sat up there straight-faced and said that it was Russian propaganda. Now, remember, our administration already has said that Russia isn't colluding with us. I mean, that's already the bizarro world. Now, they see a target, number one, right now, because the World Health Organization has completely discredited themselves. And Trump actually did the right thing in withdrawing us from the World Health Organization. So it's one of those really big conundrums, right? Steve, everything's not black and white. I don't like globalization. I don't like the vehicle of that globalization, aka the UN and its body. However, every once in a while, the UN does put out a ton of truth. All right, they do. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
hey,
no, it's. I got one more sentence for you here, Jay.
Let's do it.
Billy Barr continues. The U.S. government has reason to doubt the honesty of the ICC. The Department of Justice has received substantial credible information that raises serious concerns about a long history of financial corruption and malfeasance at the highest levels of the Office of Prosecutor. That I can't think of a more cartoonish sentence than the U.S. government has reason to doubt the honesty of the ICC.
Yeah, they're all criminals. That's the problem. Listen, here's the deal. And this is what I want to explain to people. I just harped on localized government and how tragic it would be to have Cuomo just defund certain departments, whether they be police or local governments. When you have these bodies that basically just appoint people that are what? Basically dependent on foundations and other governments to give them money. They are the most corrupt organizations you could possibly imagine. They are literally in the pocket of the oligarchs and predator class. Now, a lot of good people get involved in these things. Why? The propaganda is awesome. It is awesome. When you're growing up, you're finding the United Nations going to stop war. They're going to bring world peace, motherfucker. That's what they're there for. I want to be in the UN. I'm model UN. That's me, little Timmy Johnson.
Yeah.
South Dakota. Let's do it. All right. So now you're in there, and
It's the
you're
weirdest South Dakota accent I've ever heard in my entire life.
It was terrible. I know. Anyway.
I always appreciate when you join us, Jason. I just want to throw that out there.
We're trying to have fun, right, guys? So you got that. You come up now. Now you're in your early 20s. You're cutting your teeth. Now you're in your 30s. You're not disillusioned yet. Now the crossroads. Well, am I going to be the hardcore fighting the corruption I know that's in here, or am I going to join the game of greasers that I see everywhere? Or am I going to pick and choose my shots? And that's anywhere. Only these are at the highest echelons of power. And they're, again, to bring in unelected global governance that is really unaccountable. Unaccountable. And here's my thing. We see all these videos, and I saw people going outside of de Blasio's house, and, de Blasio, the mob's outside de Blasio's house. The last time the mob actually targeted someone that was worthwhile, that put the predator class on notice, was Mussolini in World War II. When we get somebody in the public square that's done humanity wrong, Mussolini style, maybe the rest of these oligarchs wake up and say, wait a minute, maybe this whole automation nation dehumanization plan's a bad one. But I can't even guarantee that, man. We live in the bizarro world. And
let me throw something at you then, because I had Jared Beck on Slow News Day a couple of weeks back, and he brought up Plato's Republic. And said obviously we're at the oligarchy stage of the cycles of government right now, but it's crumbling. And what comes next after oligarchy is democracy, but the original Greek demos of the people, small d democracy, which is mob rule. And there's a couple of generations of that, and then we cycle back to a republic. Have we moved too far into a global, I don't know, intelligence sharing apparatus for the republic to even make any sense in 2020? Or does Plato have a point? Did Jared Beck have a point? Because I don't think Plato foresaw automation.
Yeah, here's the problem. They might use, ordo ab chao, right? So there might be a little bit of mob rule to divide the number of people while they need us. After they don't need us, they don't fucking need us. And Plato and his crew, as advanced as they were for the time, they didn't have weapons in space. They weren't.
You hear that? Suck it, Plato. Suck it.
And the thing too, right now with these protests.
What's that?
I was going to say right now with the intense state of protests around the country, regardless of what it's for, whether it's break the lockdown, whether it's to end systemic racism, whether it's general strike protests, the one thing that no one ever focuses on, which is part of this divide and conquer strategy, is the underlying tools of our oppression, which, like we were pointing out, are the intelligence state, which are powered by our internet infrastructure, which are powered by the fact that we don't have municipal level data encryption before you even reach the broader internet, that we don't have net neutrality even. So the part that perplexes me about where mob violence will be applied is if people will realize that we're going to have to go one human generation without the internet to be able to rebuild it in such a way that actually allows for it to be decentralized and encrypted.
Good luck getting any generation full board to get rid of the internet, because again, we're on a planet of 8 billion motherfucking people. Period. And as interconnected as we also are still decentralized, but technology still has the possibility of being passed on to just about anybody in the furthest corner of the world with the right circumstance, right? The bottom line is we have no idea what the power elite have really done since Eisenhower warned us of that military-industrial complex. And what I mean is we don't know what's underground. We don't know what their true technologies are. We don't have the blueprints for their actual plans via the technology they've put into place. To imagine that you and I, as knowledgeable as this stuff as we are, as studied as we are, as much as we pay attention, know even half of what's really going on behind the scenes with this technopoly and how they've used it to Edward Bernazian style, cull the population, not just, physically cull them as in take lives, but cull them in different directions in whatever cultural revolution they see fit. Oh, it's post 9/11, war on terror. Let's get the Middle East. It's post COVID. It's your neighbor now because he won't wear a mask. And I'm just saying, these social engineers, man, I think we see a lot of their tools. We expose a lot of their tools. But at the same time, they have stuff at play that, we can only imagine, unfortunately. So I think for me, I'm team humanity, right? I think if enough people wake up to the fact that we're not fucking useless, that no matter how amazing they make a machine, we fit somewhere in the picture, and that we shouldn't just be ruled by people that somehow economically have more than us. That's not how it works. The idea, again, it's very frightening to me that in my state, Bill and Melinda Gates are going to reimagine education. Bloomberg's going to get his contact trace force. And, Eric Schmidt here, who wants to reshape the future of people, nations, and businesses in the new digital age, which we're in, is going to just reimagine New York State with again, a governor that has said that if you don't follow his rules, he will defund you. Whether you're a local municipality, government, or police force. He literally said this 3 days ago. I covered it. Go watch my latest Cuomo video. It's not cool. So, we have to stand up against this. We have to get back to the Constitution and Bill of Rights. We have to hold actual criminals accountable. Like, listen, they want to put the surveillance state on us. Guys that you could prove are war criminals like Bill Gates. That's right, motherfucker. You're a war criminal. You've done some pretty fucked things to society, my friend. And I know that you're Microsoft and you worked with the military industrial complex, and then you went beyond that to with the elites, and you got your little foundation and you got your little mitts into, weather control. Oh, that's nice. Oh, GMO food. Ooh, even better. Medicine. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, reproductive health. That's my number one stunner. And your GMO mosquitoes or whatever. But those people, they don't deserve a special place in hell. They deserve a special place in Rikers Island, which is a 24/7 reality show where every camera is accessible to citizens to show, hey, look at what these guys are really living in. No luxury prisons. They're living their life in the real deal prison. And you know what? If I want to tune in at 3 a.m. to watch Dick Cheney cry on a toilet somewhere in Rikers, I should have that. That's when we've taken back our fucking country.
So, just to be the ultimate contrarian, I guess, to that point, and just because it'll be fun to do, and it's something that we actually talked to Kevin Zeese about a little while back, is the idea of how to handle the people that have heinously abused society. Because it's easy to say, fucking torture them, burn them, but the hardest thing to do is have the first act of whatever resembles a state or your civilization be the way you want it to function. So I guess like justice is justice, and there needs to be something done to them. But I think it needs to come through transparency and open trials and through a criminal justice system that can actually hold
I'm
people
not
to account.
saying you put him there. Oh, he's on trial, baby. But again, just here's the thing, Andrew. Just like I said to you early in the very beginning, we were talking about Black Lives Matter, right? So this Chauvin case would probably be impossible to put anywhere, right? Just because it has the national media attention. You know, there's nowhere you could go to not know about this right now, right? But in the vast majority of these police brutality cases, whether they're racially motivated or not, localized judges, district attorneys, etc., are far more likely to collude. So if something happens in Los Angeles County, you know, you can probably find a county in Kentucky that will play it fair. And with these people, who puts them on trial? We have to find a way that, again, you know, that family in South Carolina, they're represented, and Bill Gates is trying. Holy shit. Like, you know, Bob Thompson, 42-year-old real estate agent with 2 kids, learns what Bill Gates did in India and why they threw him out because of his vaccine program. Oh my God, wow, those kids are my kids' age. Yeah, they get to decide. But at the same time,
I want Bill Gates's jury to be comprised entirely of people with like 4 minimum wage jobs just so they can pay rent, and you know, like couple of kids. And yeah, that's who I want Bill Gates's jury to be comprised of, because if you give him an actual jury of his peers, they're going to let him off. If you
No,
give, you know, so
give
let's
him a
stack
fucking
the
medal.
jury against that fuck. That's what I'm saying, huh?
They not only let him off, Steve, they might give him a fucking medal. They might
Right.
give him a new foundation. They might give him the building he's being tried in. And then they might actually allow him through executive order to test one of his vaccines on any of the jurors that dared to speak out against him. And his attorney, I mean, you name it, man. That's the kind of corrupt system we're in. That's my point. We don't live in a constitutional republic. For a very long time throughout society, might has been right in many cases. When you get up to that level, money can buy you so much. But when you get even beyond money, right, you get to people like the royal family, whether that be in Saudi Arabia or England. You know, you have a Prince Andrew running around that Bill Barr says, oh, we're not going to extradite him. Oh, no, we just want some evidence from him. No, Epstein killed himself. He did. That's the bizarro world we live in. And I think that above all else, we got to shout that shit from the rooftops, because if Assange has proved anything, we're not going to be able to shout that shit from the rooftops much longer. And that's why I shout for him. You know, I don't have to agree with all of his politics or his strategies or, you know, some of the things in the past that, you know, he said about 9/11, etc. I do know that I can't allow my government to paint him as a cyber terrorist on the most arbitrary of matters and then demonize the rest of us as what? Public disclosure organizations on the level of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hezbollah, folks. On the level of nation states like North Korea and Iran that they want to bomb the fuck out of. So, you know, guys, I have a hard out at 11, but I do want to let my audience know Action for Assange is the website. Why don't you gentlemen tell people what they can be expecting from you guys?
So right now we're currently in the, I think, 3rd or 4th week of our crowdfunding campaign. We're trying to get back to Washington, D.C. again. Jason, you were just awesome to come down and join us when we were there in February. We've got 3 full weeks of very memorable demonstrations and events and panels. We are always trying to find more and more people that will come join us. So please do come join us. We are about to release our 2nd teach-in video. that will be a series of from now until we're not calling it a rendition, or we're not calling it an extradition hearing anymore. Julian Assange isn't a U.S. citizen. He's not being extradited. He's being fucking renditioned. The short of the black bag, and maybe with the black bag, we don't know, but we would yeah, I lost my damn train of thought there for a second.
We'd like to have you join us in Washington, D.C.
I will say this, guys. The world is a very uncertain place right now. Obviously, there would be nothing I like more than to come out in the beginning of September in Washington, D.C. and protest the atrocities that are going on via that trial, and let people know that this is really an important issue. And Andrew, one of the things I've said that's really disheartening to me about this whole thing is, in a matter of moments, again, I get it. Race is an issue. Police brutality is an issue. There's a ton of different things surrounding this event. But the fact that we couldn't get 100 people behind us in Julian Assange in one place, and this is happening all over, really, guys, it eats me up. Like, you guys know, probably more than anybody, just spending a few days to me, I'm the real fucking deal. I'm not Instagramming myself. I'm not looking to be an influencer. I want to live my life, and I want those around me to be able to live their lives. All right, that's it. And we don't have to agree on everything. We certainly don't. But we have to agree that free speech is a big fucking issue. And we should always have the ability to expose our oppressors when they're committing war crimes and atrocities against other us's. Not other black people, not other white people, not other brown people, other us's. All of us. Every fucking one of us. And if you can't get behind that, I don't know what you can get behind. So I'm going to say this. I'm thinking autonomous zone maybe. I'm going to have a talk with my audience, whether we're doing that. I'm definitely still traveling across the country. I got to find my forever home. I can't stay in New York much longer for some of the issues I talked to you about in this very broadcast. But if the stars align and somehow, we can do this, I would love nothing more than to come down in September and be with you guys. Other than that, I do want to say, go check out Auction for Assange, help them out financially, get them down there. If I can't get there, obviously they're going to be on the show and I'm going to be covering it. Guys, I absolutely love you, but I got to jump, okay? Any last words, Andrew?
No, I just want to say go to the Chaz, man. Go join in and see what it's all about.
We'll talk about it in the DMs. All right, we'll talk about the Chaz.
The midway point between my house and Chaz is my buddy's property in Southern Oregon, where we could go shoot guns all day. So you should think about that.
And that will be the second part of the video after you have your community takeover of the Bohemian Grove, you cyber terrorist, Steve Poikonen.
You can do it,
everybody. He's a good man.
Bohemian Grove.
Later on, gentlemen. Thank you.
I did not see Storm Bohemian Grove coming out of my mouth tonight.
I like it.
Gotta tell you, if you could get 1 million or more people on that Storm Area 51 thing,
we gotta be able to at least get 18 people there.
The Bohemian Grove Autonomous Zone will be we'll do symbolic. Throw a rope around Moloch the owl. Bunch of people tear it down, stomp on it.
You have no idea how on board I am to go and rip down that statue of Moloch, buddy. I am I think that's where we're going in September. Just kidding. But yeah, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find us on Twitter at action_4 Assange. And I want to remind everyone, July 3rd is Julian Assange's birthday. Please plan a local event. Please do something, whether you're going out and hanging up flyers, whether you're going to a 4th of July event and passing out cake and water bottles. Do whatever you can in support of Julian Assange that day, and have it be something that you start planning towards as an event to get more people involved. Use it as an excuse to start a Facebook page for your local Free Assange group, what have you. But yeah, you can find our actions at actionforassange.com, and we'll be having our next teach-in come out probably here in the next week or two.
My name's Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it on YouTube by typing Slow News Day podcast into your search bar. I'm also on the Rockfin. Again, all of my super chats that go to Slow News Day are going to get rolled over into the GoFundMe. If you are a Patreon member of Slow News Day, cancel that shit and support me on the Rockfin. You get access to all of the premium content on Rockfin, and it's basically the same amount of cash. If you can, please donate to the GoFundMe. If you can't, we totally get it. Please share the link. That it helps tremendously. Other than that, thank you very much to Garland Nixon and to Jason Burmis, to Sleepy Josh on the 1s and 2s, and Mean Panda for the graphics, my co-host Andrew Smith. We love you guys. And keep screaming about Julian Assange. You please remind people that no matter what it is they're advocating for, their advocation goes fucking nowhere without a free press. And they are inherently tied to the fate of Julian Assange in their particular movement. Until next Saturday, good luck to us all.